Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And one of the most controversial changes that is incoming to midnight is what is going on with add-ons. And this seems to be an ongoing process. However, we do have a recent update with an interview between PC Gamer and Ian Hazakostas to exactly how they are feeling right now and maybe what direction that they're going to be moving into the future with regards to add-ons, because it's a really big deal. Some people think it's going to be the downfall of the game. Other people are praising it as like basically the third era of World of Warcraft, and it could be reintroducing a ton of new players potentially to the game. So it's very important to keep a beat on this. It's also important to understand how it's going to affect your gameplay, what you might be losing out on as far as performance, or what you might be gaining depending on what they are doing for changes. So we're going to be reviewing this interview and breaking it down for you. And as always, if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. So this interview explains how raid encounters are going to change with the removal of combat add-ons, and we can also extrapolate out what that's going to mean for other aspects of the game, because obviously raid engagements, whether the boss is using a major spell and how you interact with that spell is going to correlate with PvP. It's going to correlate with other aspects of the game as well, and likely their thoughts on what additions need to be put into the game. They have emphasized that the goal is not to turn all raid encounters into giant puzzles. Topics range from visual clutter to improved audio accessibility. And what's interesting about the audio accessibility is basically like text to speech, right? So for a lot of players, they play with weak auras. It pops a box on their screen, tells them when to press their cooldown or what ability to press, or tells them to move out of fire, right? These are like the main like visual and audio pop-ups. And that's what players, I think, generally feel like is playing the game for them, as opposed to the game being more readable baseline and not needing to download a foghorn in a box in order to engage with the box or engage with the boss, which is just entirely like unimmersive. So the statement here is, WoW is too hard without add-ons. Ian interview with PC Gamer. Consequences of restricting add-ons. Unsurprisingly, restricting add-on functionality has resulted in a host of trickle-down issues, forcing Blizzard to reevaluate what's presented by base UI, how players interact with encounter mechanics, and the complexity of the class they are playing while doing so. PC Gamer has said, if you're playing it out of the box, no add-ons whatsoever, and trying to play at the highest competitive levels, I do think that it is too hard, he says. And I think that consequently, hardly anyone is attempting to do that. I mean, you're going to get pressured into not doing it, right? Like even when I've raided Mythic Raid in the past, people would be like, you don't have DBM, you're trolling. And they would peer pressure you into getting it, and it's mostly because it basically guides you in the right direction, right? It makes it less likely that you'll make a mistake, and the less likely that everyone is to make a mistake, the more likely the boss is to go down, and you're going to get all of your loot, right? So it's kind of part of coercing people into making this the best result possible with the least amount of problems, even if you personally don't enjoy playing with the foghorn and a giant box on your screen. You'd rather just interact with the boss. A lot of the class changes in Midnight haven't been in the works for years, Hazakostas says. So this is kind of an emergency turn for them. Instead, he says they've popped up over the past few months. When we first began our conversation with the community around the philosophy of where we were thinking we wanted to go with add-ons, we heard a lot of feedback immediately of, that's all well and good, but how am I supposed to track this mechanic? And internally, we were like, they're not wrong. I think they're probably talking about Outlaw Rogue. They're probably talking about Blood Talents on Feral Druid. And they've gone into all of these classes and reevaluated them and stripped them out and stripped them down to a lot more bare bones, so you're not going to need these giant weak auras, timers, and telling you when these moments are happening so you don't miss it and then lose out on 30% of your overall DPS if you do, which honestly I think is the right direction for myself personally. Classes that require players to evaluate 4 separate variables within 0.7 seconds to pick the correct next action nearly require weak auras to manage, he says. Then it becomes pretty straightforward. Push the button when my UI tells me to. But that's not the game we are actually designing. That's a very important statement. That is not the game we're actually designing. They do not want you playing giant box in the middle of the screen, press button that it tells you to press. So that's a very important takeaway so far from the beginning of this interview. Not turning all encounters into giant puzzles. Somewhat ironically, considering the mechanics of Mythic Fractilis this season, the developers have been trying to use less pure coordination challenges. I think they're talking about swirlies on the ground, since they are so often solved by add-ons. Instead, their approach has been to layer multiple types of challenges on top of one another, asking players to solve a puzzle while dodging swirls and meeting a throughput check all at the same time. This helps ensure that even if an add-on is helping solve part of the problem, players are still facing multiple challenges. Though in a world without a WeakOr coordinating which players are going where, the simultaneous split-second decision-making could become overwhelming. The same thing could be said in PvP, right? Because when a class activates a cooldown, it's the same as when a boss activates a certain phase. And do you interact with it correctly and trade with it and deal with it appropriately? Adding increased visuals, making them more clear and distinct. I would really like them to add kind of like buff categories, which are like a glow around the tooltip or the box of a spell. So like Avenging Wrath on a Paladin's a major cooldown, so it should have like a red box around it. So if you see a player active and you got like a billion buffs, you know what all of them do? If you see one with a red box, you're like, oh, the red box is danger. So I know they're dangerous. You don't need to know what the icon is and what it correlates to. You just know red around the box equals danger, and now I can more properly deal with it. I think that's a great way to increase accessibility for PvP, and honestly maybe even in Mythic Raid encounters, right? Showing which spells are the most important with a different colored box on their cast time, so you know that that's like something you need to kick, and that's something that you can basically give as kind of like a priority when you're going into a dungeon. It's like, all right, red boxes is what we need to look out for. That's my own input, my own feedback for a solution for this. But PC Gamer has said, on the raid fight side, designers were well aware of what WeakOrs could do, and so they avoided putting in mechanics that would be trivialized by those add-ons. Dylan Barker, lead encounter designer, told me in an interview that the team classifies mechanics for raids into 3 categories: dexterity, strength, and intellect. Dexterity is the "we're going to ask you to dance" category. He says strength challenges pose a DPS or healing check, and intellect challenges you to react to a variable of situations within a fight. There's a bomb on you and 4 other players. He gives us an example. Where do you take it? An intellect-based encounter is the sort of thing that add-ons have historically solved pretty well, Barker says, and as a result, the team has been using them less and less over time. To make an encounter with an intellect coordination challenge that might require 4 players to move to specific spots, they can't just make 1 player have the debuff, for example. We've had to layer on dexterity and speed and pace and lethality to make things that were coordination tests harder, he says, in Mythic difficulty. I have to pull out 6 shooters and I am firing swirls at your feet, so you do both at the same time. It's a very different axis of skill. I think for a lot of people, they feel like this difficulty has just kind of like scaled out of control, right? The battle between add-on developers and game designers, and it's just like completely unapproachable now. And it's like you're not even playing the same game anymore. You're trying to solve the add-on type of situation, and that's my biggest grievance with it, is that it feels like you're playing against add-ons and you're not playing against the game anymore at a certain extent, especially with the combat. I'm totally fine with add-ons that alter the cosmetics, totally fine with the add-ons that help people that have disabilities and need accessibility features. 100% on board with that, but things like this is just like, I feel like we've gone too far. It's gone too far. Another big part of that is the amount of time given to players to solve a particular mechanic. In a world where WeakOrs can solve the problem in a split second, pacing has ramped up to counterbalance it. Giving players less time to assess the situation, players will now need to solve these mechanics themselves. Though by tweaking the amount of damage, reducing the number of targeted players, or giving them a few more seconds to react, the intent is to keep roughly the same level of overall difficulty as before. It really depends on how much of you've been using WeakOrs as a crutch. I mean, going from just having to look at a box or a foghorn to like, what's on the screen? Like, where's the dragon at? Like, where am I even in the game? And not just staring at the boxes. I think it's going to be a jarring change initially, but that's where it's going to all play out. Like, I'm very curious to see what the first raid tests are like, as well as the first PvP tests, to see what people's response is to this type of situation, because it could either be like, oh my god, this is actually so much better, and now I don't need to worry about updating my add-ons, and I can get new people in without having to worry about them downloading them or quitting because they don't want to download them, and maybe the game will just be better overall, or maybe everybody freaks out, loses their minds, and it's terrible. But their goal is not to have it be the latter. They want it to be the improved experience. PC Gamer has said, Hazakostas says the idea is when all of the changes are done, the level of challenge, particularly at the highest of tiers, should be the same. So basically the game is going to be the same, so you don't need to go download add-ons. That is an ideal situation. I don't think it's going to look all that different, he says. I think the skill ceiling should be in about the same place, and the ways in which it's measured should be fairly similar for people. Now, some classes have had their rotation stripped down dramatically. So I think you're honestly going to perform better on some classes after these changes, even with no add-ons. Like the simplicity of like Survival Hunter, for example, with the changes that have been applied, like you're going to perform better than you did before, because you're not going to have to worry about all those additional interactions with things like Tip the Spear, for example. The floor, the average level of gameplay should rise. See, he's also stating that as people take advantage of better designed fights and classes that are easier for people to read without help, he says. But the challenge for great players should remain, even with easier to see mechanics and less complex character spell rotations. And it's this battle of how big is the gap between the best players and like the average player or even the worst player, right? Like how big is that gap? They introduced the one button rotation to try and raise the floor closer to the top, because obviously when there's a large gap, then these players can't access these players because the content is too challenging for them to incorporate them, and there becomes a void between them, and then the void grows more and more and more, and the people on the bottom start to quit and don't bother at a certain point. And that's fundamentally the issue with a lot of games at the moment, and depending on what their take is on bridging this gap and how far should that gap go, it can entirely determine the future success of the game. The progression from being a beginner player to a good player lies in mastering a rotation to the point where you can execute it on a combat dummy, Hazakostas says. I know what buttons to push, I'm gearing correctly, I can execute close to my maximum potential damage in a completely static situation. Yeah, I mean, you're just adding layers, right? The first layer is, can you do good damage? Next one is, can I do good damage while avoiding mechanics? And that's the same for PvP. That's like the main recommendation I would give to any player. Now let's throw some raid mechanics in the mix. Every player's damage goes down, and when you're distracted, everyone suffers some throughput. If you're focused on PvE skill, a lot of it is what percentage of your theoretical damage you can do while multitasking. Speaking of Mythic Fractilis, the game director acknowledges that the current fight would be unreasonably difficult, stating emphatically that they're not looking to turn all of the game's raid encounters into giant puzzles, but they should be more involved than knowing how to run a star marker. So going back to the old school mechanics, or basically going back in time, we're rolling back time so that they can actually add the mechanics that they used to add that you may have enjoyed in the past. Which I think for some people is going to be good. And I just played through the initial start of the alpha, like Questing Zone, and I was like, they're doing a good job of like manipulating nostalgia, taking us back to Isle Kildanis and seeing the Sunwell and seeing where you did daily quests and seeing the statue that we erected of the Draenei and the Blood Elves back from TBC. I feel like they're doing a good job of incorporating that element as well. PC Gamer has said many players rightly look at the mythic version of that fight and say, we don't think this is possible without an add-on. And honestly, I wouldn't say it's not possible. I would say it's unreasonably difficult, Hazakostas has said. It would be interesting to have the current guilds try and clear the mythic raid. I think it just got nerfed a lot, though, so it wouldn't be the same. But just try to clear it without add-ons. I would just like to see it. You know, they say that they can't, but I feel like it would be the biggest content ever if Matt and Liquid could convince their guild to do a raid clear with no add-ons in anybody, and just to see what the experience is like. I think it would be the highest viewed video on YouTube if I could get them to do it, not out of my own personal interest, but out of their own personal interest for their brands and their content creation, to see that. I don't know if you guys would like to see that, but I would like to see that. Same kind of goes with PvP, right? Like, maybe I'm going to make a boomkin or something, and I'm going to play from 0 rating and see how high I can get with 0 add-ons, just to see how much worse it actually is. Like, is it that bad? Is it the real boogeyman that everybody is anticipating? Without WeCars trivializing the encounter by telling players exactly where to go, the team can tune in to give players a few seconds more to get there, or by reducing the number of players who need to move or tweaking the damage required to kill the boss. Now, that coordination becomes a hallmark of the encounter in a way that we honestly haven't been able to do for a long time, because we knew that WeCars would do it. He says, we're not looking to turn all our raid encounters into giant puzzles for people to solve, but I think coordination and figuring out the solutions to these multifaceted problems has long been one of the more interesting parts of raiding. Instead of the first 3 wipes are because someone had their weak aura misconfigured, he says, and then after that, all you have to know is how to run to a star. Yeah, you're playing to like interact with the boxes rather than the actual fight itself. Continuing to improve accessibility. Now, this was one area that I was wondering how much it was going to hold back what they can do with add-ons, right? Because I don't want the game to be in a spot where people who had disability suddenly can't play the game, right? So whether they're deaf or they're blind or whatever it may be, I wouldn't want that. So what are they going to do with this? Accessibility remains a high priority for Blizzard, particularly following feedback from Undaunted, several members of which were since invited to give more feedback and test new accessibility features, which include new text-to-speech and audio cues in Midnight. We've already seen the first wave of these updates on the alpha, though some questions remain over whether it's enough. While Blizzard does appear keen on adding more options to their UI and cooldown manager, they're still limited by what the developers decide you need to see or hear. As it currently stands, there's no option to create a reminder saying blue goes left and red goes right, or extra loud air horn when targeted by a particularly important mechanic, though customizable audio cues for bosses are something that Blizzard will look at over time. Now, I think Blizzard really likes making their own audio cues, and I remember doing this when I raided back in TBC in Zalaman, where we were dying to the thunder boss, the eagle boss. We kept dying because he would go up in the air and lightning would hit the platform and we would all die. But I noticed that there was like a specific audio that the boss would say before that mechanic would happen. And because I noticed that, I was like, I think when he says this, he's going to do that mechanic. And it's basically a foghorn, but it's a more immersive foghorn. And you just need to be paying attention to the boss. The bosses almost always, historically throughout World of Warcraft, have either had a voice line or a sound effect that is about to cue that they're doing the next mechanic. And depending on what they say, it determines what mechanic. Like, effectively, that WeCore is already in the game. It's just converting that immersive experience to a foghorn or a box on the screen. But it's technically still there. You just need to be aware to the specifics of it. It's no different than, imagine if Overwatch, instead of someone announcing their voice line for their ultimate, it just sounded a foghorn with the ultimate icon in the middle of your screen. That's the difference, right? It's there. It's just not universally equivalent in all encounters. It changes depending on what they decide it's going to be. And you can see it here, like spread in 2.7 seconds. Although the visual clutter of world markers used by WeCores is mentioned, nothing is said about the propensity to have a purple boss in a purple room dropping purple void zones, the continual wall of spell effects flying in from allied casters, or melee being firmly eye-to-belt buckle with the latest and larger-than-life raid boss and its unreasonably small hitbox. Despite repeatedly acknowledging these issues, it's something players have continually struggled with, which we can only hope that Midnight will take greater care to avoid. And I think that they've been more on the ball with this throughout the War Within, when they updated the swirlies to be like giant red circles and blue circles, distinctly different from the colorations of the unicorn vomit of the mechanics of the boss or the players and the number of players that are in there, right? Visual clutter is also going to be something, in the new Epic BG that's going to come out, that's going to be something to consider. And with the, introduction of Unholy Death Knight rework, they're going to have more pets. How many pets are going to be on the screen, whether it's in raiding or PvP? I'm even concerned about that as well. So let's see what they say here. Accessibility remains a top focus for the team, especially as it relates to this initiative. So we want to hear from all of our players, and especially from those who rely on special setups to play our game, he says. So they want the feedback about issues related to deaf, blind, whatever that is, situation they happen to be in. They want that feedback. They're not just going to blindly do these changes without listening to that feedback. Crash Reed, lead user experience designer, says Blizzard will also be adding customizable audio cues specifically for player class cooldown manager tool. Options will include assigning sounds or text-to-speech to abilities coming off cooldown, or a variety of other event states, he says. So that's interesting. It'll be like Gladiator Losa, but it'll only be for your cooldowns. It won't be for enemy cooldowns, I assume, which enemy cooldowns is the main thing that players use this for, right? And it'll go be like Cyclone, and the enemy healer is casting a Cyclone without even being aware that they're casting a Cyclone. But this will be able to give you like, oh, your Bark Skin came out cooldown, so it'll be like Bark Skin became available. Because I agree with like constantly looking down away from the game field into your action bar and all that stuff does get very annoying. Although after enough time of play, eventually you kind of internalize the cooldown of a lot of things. But for a new player, you're going to be looking down a lot, right? It's like when you get a guitar or a flute in your hand and like you don't know where your fingers go and you're like, I'm holding this backwards. You see, like, even start holding it backwards. You're like trying to look at like, are my fingers on the right pad? Am I holding down the right two fingers? And it's the same thing when you jump into a video game, right? For the first time, you're figuring out like which trigger is the shoot trigger, which is that, and you're getting accustomed to the instrument fundamentally. This would help you out because it would just tell you, right? Like, it'd be as if I was holding that flute and be like, your third finger is not on the right key. And it would help you out a bit. Personally, I'm a UI person, but I would much rather hear it than stare at my UI. Reed says boss warnings will also come with sound cues, but at this point, those are locked by the team and not customizable. See, they really like keeping that like unique, like this boss says our specific line, and that means that this is the mechanic happening, and you just need to know that, and you need to just learn that. That's like a part of discovering the fight for them. And I think that comes from the old school raid days, because that's how it's always been since then. That would be something we could look at over time, though, he says. So maybe they are willing to change. Seems like they're still a little bit stubborn on some things, right? They've been willing to move on others, and other things they're still a little bit like, this is how it was in the old days. And I remember the interview with Ian Hazzikostas that he had a big talk, and he talked about how he wants to respect the original essence of the game, what the designers at the time were implementing. And I think this is one of those elements that he's probably not going to be moving on too easily. And I kind of agree with him on not moving too easily on it, because I just feel like it's way more immersive to have a unique boss line that you remember and you're like, oh god, he said the line, like something bad's about to happen, instead of a foghorn going. I just feel like it's not the same experience. According to Reed, nameplate changes will help players track mobs that have aggroed onto them, even if they're off the screen, as floating nameplates for those monsters will appear at the edge of the display. Some other visual clutter that players leaned on heavily, including raid markers used by weak auras, may no longer be necessary after the midnight changes go through. Oh, interesting. So you're not even going to need to put raid markers down on where to go in specific mechanics. Now remember, they're all removing some other core spells, like Earthen Wall Totem for Shaman, which in PvP, obviously, people literally made raid markers to try and help people figure out where it is, because that spell's animation was terrible. So they've just deleted the spell. You don't have to worry about using the raid marker or somebody running out of your totem now in those instances. So this isn't like another state of them adapting to that. A large number of players have been invited to participate in Midnight's alpha test to give feedback on all the add-on encounter and class design changes, he says, and their thoughts will cause further tweaks. This is the starting point of iteration. This is definitely not set in stone. So this is the best time to relay your feedback, relay your thoughts, make forum posts, obviously try and be civil. There's no name calling or whatever, just explain your situation, why you think that this could be an issue. Because now is the time. Now is the time that they're going to be listening to it. I'm going to be doing my best to relaying as much feedback as I can with regards to things that I would like to see improved. And I'll be reviewing all the classes on the channel as well. So if you'd like to support me in that journey, hit the subscribe button, and obviously relaying that information to you so you can hopefully get the maximum amount of enjoyment out of your gameplay experience and not feel like you're making the wrong decision, whether it's what class or what content you're doing. I'm also going to be likely branching out into more content, so I'm hoping that maybe I can jump in on some of this raid testing, jump in on some of the dungeon testing, because I haven't been raiding competitively in a very long time, or dungeons competitively in a very long time. So I'd be jumping in as a new player experience to that without a UI and seeing how approachable that is. And I think that would be an interesting point of view. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I think this is a great update. They're still kind of just riding the middle where they could basically go any direction if they wanted to, but they have said things in this interview that make it seem like they really don't want to have it be foghorns and boxes. They do not want that, but they will listen to make sure that the game is as accessible as possible. So I think this is a reasonable update given the outcry that we've seen for it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and the breakdown. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you on the next one.